Thank you so much, Abigail, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christos Xenofondos. I'm the Assistant Director for Administrative Services at the Rhode Island Department of Transportation and Chair of AASHTO's Committee on Performance-Based Management. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of our panelists and attendees to today's Transportation Performance Management webinar. AASHTO's Transportation Performance Management Technical Service Program, or TSP as you hear us call it, is thrilled to be able to bring you this transportation performance management series in collaboration with the Federal Highway Administration. We greatly appreciate the partnership with the Federal Highway Administration and look forward to our continued collaboration. This is the 26th bi-monthly webinar of a series that aims to support the broad TPM community by sharing lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the transportation performance management community. We are pleased that today's webinar will feature Garret Eucalitto, Connecticut DOT Commissioner and current AASHTO President, who will keynote the webinar. We're honored and privileged to have Garret with us here today, particularly after the very successful spring AASHTO meeting that was hosted in Hartford last week. Our panel will feature speakers from Cambridge Systematics, Garver, and Texas DOT, exploring how effective collaboration and clear communication can transform traditional performance management practices into engaging conversations and shared experiences. For more information on this webinar series, please visit tpm-portal.com and navigate to events in the main menu and then select TPM webinar series. On the portal, you will also find archives of previous webinars and links to video and slides from today's webinar, which will also be hosted on the site. If you have any suggestions on future webinar topics or have questions for the presenters during today's webinar, please submit your comments or questions using the webinar's chat feature. We will answer questions during panelist discussion at the end of the webinar. Just a quick note on audio logistics that if you haven't already, please be sure to mute your audio so that our presenters are not interrupted. Thank you for that. And now I will turn it over to Anna McLaughlin, Program Director for Transportation Program Management, to provide a national perspective.
Thank you, Christos, for that introduction. Good afternoon to everyone joining us. Good morning to those joining from the West Coast. The AASHTO Committee on Performance-Based Management is really proud to sponsor this webinar series, working with our partners at Federal Highways. These webinars create valuable opportunities to connect transportation professionals, such as yourselves, across agencies and jurisdictions around critical topics in performance management. Today's session highlights case studies on how effective collaboration and communication transform traditional performance management practices into engaging narratives that resonate with our stakeholders. I'd like to acknowledge the 39 states that are currently participating in AASHTO's Performance Management Technical Services Program, which makes this webinar series possible. For those unfamiliar with the TSP, it provides member states with resources like this webinar series, peer exchanges, and the TPM portal that Christos mentioned. I always like to take an opportunity to call out this valuable online resource at tpm-portal.com. Check it out. And again, the materials from today's webinar will be posted there. While I also have you as a captive audience, I also want to let you know that the Committee on Performance-Based Management will hold its annual in-person business meeting this September, the 23rd through the 25th in Baltimore, Maryland. We'll be having a performance management peer exchange in conjunction with the business meeting. Baltimore is going to be a lot of fun, and we're very grateful to Maryland DOT for hosting us this year. So I encourage everyone to mark your calendars for this valuable networking and learning opportunity. Also, a benefit of the TSP is that member states will also receive travel support to attend, making it even more accessible for our members. So if you'd like more information about the TSP or have questions about the annual business meeting, please reach out to me directly. I'm happy to discuss. Again, I just want to say thank you all for joining today. I'm confident that you'll find tremendous value in our presenters' expertise and insights. I'm really excited to listen to the presentations and hear the discussion. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Christos, to introduce our keynote speaker, Commissioner Garret Eucalitto.
Thank you, Anna. And just quickly, for today's agenda, our speakers before each present will introduce us speakers, and we're going to start with, as we mentioned, with Garret Eucalitto, the Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Transportation and the 2025 AASHTO President. And then we're going to continue in two parts on performance management lessons from national STEEP research with Ken White and Mike Landvik. And then in part two, the implementing enhanced STEEP processes in Texas. We're going to wrap up with a panelist discussion and wrap up. And I would also like to thank Gene Wallace of Minnesota DOT and Vice President for the Committee on Performance-Based Management, who's going to help us close today's webinar. Next slide, please. So part of the webinar objectives for today, we're going to look into the crucial role of storytelling in improving transportation performance management. When we started performance management many, many years ago now, we all said that performance management helps us tell a story. So this is what we are really going to go over today, how we can effectively tell our story using performance management and creating compelling narratives that align the goals while fostering a culture of transparency and continuous improvement. And next one, please. So for our next part, let me introduce Garret Eucalitto. Garret leads one of Connecticut's largest state agencies, overseeing over 3,300 professionals and an annual budget of nearly $3 billion. Under his leadership, the Connecticut DOT prioritizes a safe, efficient, and sustainable transportation network. On a national scale, Garret was elected president of AASHTO for 2025, where he's focused on tackling the nationwide safety crisis on our roadways. His leadership emphasizes safer communities, safer users, and safer workers. Garret also serves on key transportation and boards, including the Executive Committee of the Transportation Research Board, serves as co-chair of the Northeast Corridor Commission, and chairs Connecticut's Vision Zero Council to eliminate traffic fatalities. Please join me in welcoming Connecticut DOT Commissioner and 2025 AASHTO President Garret Eucalitto. Garret?
Thank you, Christos. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the emphasis areas that I selected this year. So let me just share my screen. Okay. As part of being the AASHTO president, we get to select a presidential emphasis area, which is really the focus of our attention for the 12 months we serve as AASHTO president. I selected safety as one of my top priority issues, largely because of it hit home for me, and it's been a focus of my career, both in government and outside of government. So want to use this opportunity to talk about, one, why I selected that, but then also how we can use this approach to better tell a story to help hopefully drive towards safer roadways for all users. So I think everyone on this call probably knows that we have the safety crisis is real. It's a stark reality that we have just so many people's lives lost every single year. This graphic here really is telling. I had not seen this previously until just recently, but I think it's just an overwhelming graphic to point out the fact that in 2023, nearly 41,000 people lost their lives on our roadways, and that could fill an entire baseball stadium. And you think about how many people that is, and they are not just a number, right? They are actual individuals with lives, and so losing one of those individuals impacts many others across our communities. It's not in isolation. So we continuously talk about how at the state DOT level, all of us talk about how safety is our top priority. And that was kind of, one of my holdups of selecting this as an emphasis area was, okay, we all know this is our top priority. Do I really need to do this? Is it just hammering it home? Also, the fact that we had multiple previous presidents have safety as a priority as well. But I ultimately decided it has to be continued to be brought up given what we were seeing happening on our roadways the past several years. So my approach was breaking into a few different buckets. Christos mentioned safer communities, safer users, and safer workers. So when I talk about centering safety on communities, for me, that really means understanding the community values, engaging with the residents. We can't just assume what the appropriate roadway treatment is for that community based on looking at Google Maps. We need to actually go out there, talk to the residents, and figure out what do they want to see in their community. They're the ones that live there every single day. They are the most impacted by the decisions we make. So we need to work with the community to determine what safety improvements work in each specific situation, in each specific community. It's not a one-size-fits-all treatment. So that's when I talk about centering safety on communities. On users, that is something, it's a little bit aimed more at the behavioral side of things, which sometimes we at AASHTO focus on the infrastructure. But on the behavioral side, while we continue to make better investments across the board in making safer roadways and engineering safer roadways and designing safer roadways and building safer roadways, we continue to see an increase in serious injuries and fatalities on our roads. So what's happening behind the wheel? What can we do to get people to make the right choice, or ensure that we're using roadway treatments or technology to force a reduction in some of the behavior that is causing these crashes? So to force a reduction in speeds, to force a reduction in impaired driving. And so those are some of those focus areas that I leaned into. And then the last one was safer workers. That one hits personal for all of us at every state DOT. We've all lost state DOT employees to crashes, and it really hits home. My DOT lost an employee last year. It was a terrible event I hope to never have to go through again. And it still is something that is driving us every single day to try and do better, to try and make it safer for everyone on the roadway every single day. So, for us at the state DOTs, we have a lot of data as transportation professionals, but it's difficult sometimes to translate that into stories that can help move people from telling them the data points to getting them to actually act and maybe change their behavior or care about the issue. So since 2020, we have seen an increasing trend in risky behaviors. Those high speeds we saw since 2020, in my state, they have not really come down. We continue to see extreme and reckless speeding. And we are not seeing a reduction in that, even though the traffic has returned. Same thing in my state in impaired driving, both alcohol and especially now a lot of more drug impaired driving, or what is called polyuse, alcohol and drugs. That is becoming increasingly frequent. So these trends in risky behaviors, we need to have a better way to communicate that. And that's something that we continue to struggle with. So how can we build those compelling narratives by using those metrics that we talk about, and then build the support using those metrics, tying it to real lives, building support for our efforts to try and improve safety, and then force some behavioral change while we're talking about the actual data that we have access to. So safer communities, talked about this a little bit earlier about like what I wanted to focus on, but this is one of the ones that we all have use cases that we can show how the roadway has improved the community in which we live, in which we work, in which we play. So being able to demonstrate that and talk about what the benefits are of those countermeasures is really important. We need to be able to explain to the community, rather than just using engineering terms, we need to be able to use lay terms, right? About what's the value of this treatment that we're going to do on this roadway. What is the benefit of adding a bike lane here or a two-way left turn lane? What's the benefit of that to the community? What's the benefit of a raised crosswalk or a roundabout or a rapid rectangular flashing beacon? Or, improving some guide rails, improving some signage for some chevrons to indicate curves ahead. We've had instances in our state where people have opposed installation of some signage because they don't like the size of the signage. They don't like that it's very lit up in the dark when headlights shine on it. So we have to do a better job explaining why it's important to install these signs indicating a curve ahead. And part of that is, photos. So getting out there and getting photos before and after you do a project really can have a huge benefit to show what we're talking about when we talk about what could be done in their community. If they can relate to a neighboring community or a nearby community that, oh, yeah, okay, I know that street. I've driven down there. Yeah, that's I want my town to look like that. That's really helpful. Safer road users. Again, this is the second one where, how can we address unsafe behaviors through narratives? So this is where, when you talk to the communications professionals, storytelling really can help address those concerns, those concerning trends in speeding, impairment, and distraction. And this has always been a huge part of NHTSA funded projects, trying to educate the public about unsafe roadway behavior. And it needs to address all road users. So we need to talk about, what is the impact on pedestrians? What's the impact on motorcyclists? In my state, we've had a huge increase in motorcycle fatalities and serious injuries. So trying to re-up that message about, who is being killed on these roadways in these motorcycle crashes. And you as a driver need to be paying attention to motorcyclists. And because they are sharing the road with you, and it's not like a car, and you need to pay attention to that. So we use the data to identify the problems, but we need to have stories to humanize the issue and then inspiring some solutions. And so what you see on the screen there is one thing that we have started participating in 2 years ago in 2023. We became a partner with the Driven to Protect initiative. It's part of the Driver Alcohol Detection System for Safety. It's a federally funded program that is testing alcohol detection technology, which is passive in the vehicle. So unlike an ignition interlock device where you have to have a forced breath into the equipment, which will then allow you to turn on the vehicle, this is more passive. It's constantly monitoring the blood alcohol concentration of the user. It's in the vehicle you see on the screen is a test vehicle that we use to go into the community and do outreach programs to talk about impaired driving and talk about STEM. We teach people how the technology works. It's also in my vehicle. It's in 7 other vehicles at this point as well. So we're trying to raise more awareness and educate people on this while participating in the federal research project to help drive some impaired driving down. And on worker safety, again, I saw last year, Ohio DOT had an amazing ad campaign, putting a face to the workers on the roadside, both the DOT workers, the tow truck operators, the fire, the EMS, the police. And that was so moving. It humanized the individuals that when you're driving may just be a quick flash on the side of the road for drivers who don't pay attention to what we do. And it really showed them in their home, in their personal environment, and who they are as a human being. And so that's something that I feel passionate about. We need to humanize the people who are most at risk on our roadways, are those who are working alongside the roadway, the highways. And we need to make people realize that that is a husband, a sister, a wife, a brother, a cousin, a grandchild. We need to make everyone driving on our roadways realize that when they see those signs, when they see the orange, when they see the flashing lights, they need to slow down and move over in order to protect them. And so that's something that I think is continuously important as people are more distracted behind the wheel. They're making poor decisions behind the wheel. We need to get in their face about this and really connect those work zone safety issues back to the community in which they live. Because in my state DOT, we have employees that live in every single community in our state. And I bet most of yours are like that. So there is a direct community impact when one of our employees is lost. So the principles of effective safety storytelling, like I've been talking about, centering that human experience. It applies, these principles apply across all different contexts and audiences, but really use the data as that supporting evidence, not the main focus. I've been guilty of this too, where I will go up and be, when I'm talking to my legislature or talking to the press, I can be a little too technical and a technocrat and very detailed. And to tell the story in the communications world, to tell the story to our legislators, to community officials, we need to make that story relevant to the daily life of the individual. So show, don't just tell, really important, and making it relevant to the daily life. So here's one highlight I want to show, which is, as our roads became more deadly in Connecticut, we decided to try and put it in the face of everyone driving on the roadway. So we started using our overhead VMS signs to display real-time fatality numbers across our state. So it was intended to be a wake-up call. And there was a lot of, conflicting opinion on this inside our agency, whether we should do this or not. They thought it might get some negative attention. And my thought process was, that's good. I want the negative attention. I want people to realize that these are people, that the roads are becoming unsafe, and we need to raise awareness around that. So it's not just a data point, it's a real crisis on our roadways. It's a public health crisis. A lawmaker called our signs dark, but they admitted that it made her slow down. And that's really the goal. And I've heard numerous other cases where students or youth will mention to their parent that they noticed the numbers went up from the previous week. So every Monday, we have the new updated numbers up on our highway every Monday morning and staying up throughout the day, so people can slowly see those numbers pick up, and it really drives it home for them. So how can you integrate storytelling into performance management? Performance management and storytelling really should work in that continuous cycle. So we need to measure not just safety outcomes, but also the effectiveness of our communications. So for example, could you do a before and after survey of the messaging and the campaigns? One thing I have been frustrated by at a national level is some of the messaging campaigns we've been using for years have not changed much. And so that's something. When recently I was down visiting with NHTSA leadership, and I mentioned that to them. Our media landscape is changing as a nation. How people digest information, where they get their information from, is changing before our eyes, and we need to be ahead of that, or at least close to catching up to that, if we want to get our message across appropriately and in front of the individuals who are increasingly coming onto our roadways, the youth, and we need to get in front of that new medium where they are consuming their information. And some of the old messages just aren't working anymore. So centering safety through better storytelling, this really is, an opportunity for everyone in every state DOT to start with, choose one story from your data, and then share the success and lessons you learned through that process. And just remember, our goal for all of us in the transportation community is 0 deaths on our roadways. And we can get there. It will take a lot of effort and time, but we have to start somewhere, and we have to start with using the data to craft that better story to hopefully drive some better decisions behind the wheel. So with that, I will wrap up, and I look forward to the conversation later.
Thank you so much, Garret, for the presentation. And Garret will be part of that panel later on, so you'll have an opportunity to ask questions at that time. So we'll now hear from our next speakers, Ken White and Mike Landvik. Ken White is a senior associate at Cambridge Systematics with expertise in strategic planning, finance, grant writing, and statewide transportation improvement programming. He's an experienced leader of complex plans and programs, and has led planning projects across the country for state, regional, and local clients. His work has included the development of 2 asset management plans, 3 STIPs, and more than 20 successful federal grants, winning over $700 million. But his real claim to fame is that he actually was able to put up with me for quite a few years. Mike Landvik is a senior planner with Garver, specializing in assisting state DOTs with improving their planning and programming processes. With over 18 years of transportation planning experience, Mike's work has focused on statewide transportation improvement programs, local public agency, LPA programs, and project prioritization. Following that, as part of part 2, we'll be hearing from Casey Wells. Casey Wells is the Systems Planning Section Director at the Texas Department of Transportation. He oversees the teams responsible for statewide planning, MPO planning and coordination, and the statewide transportation improvement program. Key projects these teams work on include Connecting Texas 2050, which is Texas DOT's long-range transportation plan, statewide transportation resilience plan, carbon reduction strategy and program funding, MPO programs, and developing and revising Texas 4-year STIP. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Ken.
Thank you, Christos, and thank you for the warm introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. So first, I want to thank Garret for the compelling presentation on safety, and also make the transition point that we're going to talk a little bit about a different type of storytelling. Here, we're going to talk about storytelling of kind of states to each other, and learning from states, and learning best practices, and learning how to grow and improve by listening to one another. We're going to talk a little bit about some peer research that Mike and I have been involved in on behalf of the Texas Department of Transportation, all about STIPs and capital programming and 4-year planning and 10-year planning and all the wonderful things that go into that. And so I'm going to throw a lot of information at you over the next 15, 20 minutes or so bear with me. But we've got a lot to cover. So I'm going to start by just giving a little bit of background of STIP planning in Texas. And Mike, of course, as always, feel free to chime in and interrupt at any point. But so STIP management in Texas is intensely complicated as one of the largest states in the country. 25 districts, 24 MPOs to work with, hundreds of partners. And in Texas specifically, the STIP includes more than just projects that come out of the TIPs, right? It also includes federal lands projects, tribal TIP projects, NEVI projects, transit projects, projects across Texas parks and wildlife, for example. And so there's a total of 51 TIPs that must be reconciled with the statewide plan, the STIP. And so there are a lot of key challenges in a state that big and in an environment like that, including plan alignment, scale and schedule of revision, and of course, process consistency across all those types of documents I just referenced. And so really the genesis of the work we're going to talk about today was to develop a clear understanding of what the STIP process looks like in other states and figure out, what does the production and development process look like for them? What do organizational roles, responsibilities, and relationships look like? What are other states doing to manage the development of their STIP? How does data and revision management get handled? And then how do they deal with consultation of agency planning partners and the public to understand the role of capital plans in developing the STIP as well, like state budgets or 5 or 6 or 7 or 10-year state capital plans? And then ultimately to identify opportunities to apply some of the innovative practices that we heard about in Texas for the Texas Department of Transportation, which is what you'll hear Casey talk about a bit towards the end of the presentation. But to give you some background on kind of what we learned, who we talked to, just going to give an overview of some key findings. So first and foremost, diversity of approach. And you heard Garret say a lot of things like this in terms of implementing solutions for safe systems as well. And this is nothing new, right? But it's never one size fits all. But I will say going into this research, we anticipated that there might be 3 or 4 types of STIPs around the country, and maybe you could kind of batch states into a couple of different typologies. And the answer is there's no 2 are exactly alike. There's 50 different types and 50 different processes and 50 different ways of thinking and histories and backgrounds. And the same goes true for how the STIPs are aligned with each of the other types of plans in each state or region. Capital plans, TIPs, MTPs, they all play variable roles. And states have applied and come up with a lot of really strategic approaches to managing data using issues like grouping, for example, that can really help improve STIP management efficiency. But underlying all of that is this core kind of consistent finding that relationships really matter, and that partnerships at every level, whether it's state to regional, state to local, state to federal, federal to regional, federal to local, et cetera, they all matter and they all inform how STIPs get built, managed, revised, and ultimately how federal funding gets authorized and how projects get delivered in each one of the 50 states. So let's talk a little bit about the methodology and what we used to get to the information I'm going to present to you here today. So we started off with a comprehensive nationwide scan for all 49 states. I say 49 because Texas, of course, was our reference point. And then we developed a questionnaire that we sent out to 22 of those states. And we chose those 22 states through just a review of public documents. We looked at, what seemed to be available online, what could we learn about a state that was just kind of out there. And, based on what we could learn, how applicable was that going to be to the unique context of Texas that I started with early on. And then ultimately, we tried to interview all 22 of those states. We were able to interview 19 of them. And our hope is to continue to do some ongoing engagement with those states over time. So just a little bit of background on the nationwide scan we did. So we looked at 54 variables across 10 categories in all 49 of those states. We looked at things like state characteristics, the STIP status. Did they, have a fresh one? Was it 2 years old? Is it time to update it, et cetera? What kind of content was included? What was their revision process? What could we learn about it from what was publicly available? Financial planning, how did they go about that? How did they set targets? How did they distribute funds to regional partners? Consultation with governments, what did that look like? Who seemed to be at the table in developing the STIP and what role did they play? Public participation, how do you manage public comment? How do you encourage engagement? How do you get folks in the door, get them to pay attention, get them to contribute to the STIP development process? And then ultimately how federal requirements are navigated. And that was one of the more interesting things we found talking to all these different states, was that there is in theory one set of federal requirements, but there are 50 different interpretations of exactly what those federal requirements beg of each state and of each federal partner. And so we heard about a lot of different kind of innovations and variations on a theme as we went along here. So here's a quick list of the states that we were able to interview. Our priority was to get a representative sample across the country. So we used the AASHTO regions to chop them up. And so we talked to a lot of states in the Midwest, Northeast, Southeast, and Western regions as well. Florida, Tennessee, and Alaska, unfortunately, we were not able to interview, but would always welcome the opportunity to as well. And when we sent that questionnaire out, we sent that questionnaire to that full list of 22 states as well. And we asked 26 questions across 3 major topics. And we were interested in those things you heard me talk about initially. Organizational roles, who's involved, data, how do you work with all the information that's needed to feed a STIP? And then how do you manage consultation with agency planning partners? And we got responses from 18 states. And here are some interesting data points that we heard from. And so we asked folks like, for example, who's initiating projects? Is it the central office, headquarters of state DOT? Is it your district staff? Is it your regions? And as you can see from the little chart at the top there, we got quite a bit of variation. And of course, there's some overlap between states here as well. And so in some cases, it was, regions and HQ. In some cases, it was districts and HQ, but never the regions, and, vice versa. And we also asked states like, how do you develop your program? And I know I'd love to tee up Mike here a little bit, because Mike and I, as we've been going through this project, I came out of Rhode Island, as Christos referenced. That's where I started my career, was at Rhode Island DOT, where we were an example of a state where the STIP really informs a lot of other planning documents and things that fit on both sides of it, either informing kind of development of long range plans or informing development of short range plans and budgets and things like that. And Mike, you came out of Missouri, which I know had a different feel and kind of a different set of rules. And Missouri was one of the states we talked to. But what we saw was 14 states had this kind of tip first model where the regional partners are developing their transportation improvement programs that then get rolled up into a STIP. And 4 of the states we talked to had more of a STIP first model where the STIP is being developed. There's some kind of targets or programming being set in the STIP. And then the STIP is used as the vehicle to pass resources to the regional partners to then program their tips. And Mike, I don't know if you want to offer any commentary on that. Yeah,
right. As working for the Missouri DOT, we were a state that developed the STIP first, essentially. So, and it's important to note in most of the states where they do that, the STIP is mostly on-system DOT projects, DOT-led projects. So it's kind of more simplified that way. You start with the STIPs, and then you work with the MPOs to give them your projects to include into the tip, the DOT projects into the tip. So there's some variation. I think, Ken, too, it wasn't maybe captured in the survey, maybe 1 or 2 states kind of almost did it at the same time. There were a few, it was like this like negotiation handoff where I'll give you the tip if you give me the STIP, and they do it right at the same time. So there were a couple of those as well, which was unique.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that point, by kind of the second data point you see there, single tip versus 7 regional tips, that refers to states and how they treated their rural projects. And so 11 of the states we talked to had just like a single tip that says, here's all of our projects that occur outside of a metropolitan area. They're all listed here. And 7 states we talked to did individual tips for each one of their rural areas. And so that's an example of like how Texas does it, for example. But then there's also this difference in like rule and procedure and engagement. So 5 states can kind of amend or veto projects that show up in tips. And 13 of the ones we talked to have a direct MOU with Federal Highway and FTA that kind of governs how all of this works and kind of lays out roles and rules and expectations and rules of engagement.
Well, Ken, I'll note too that a lot of some of those points, especially like the single tip versus regional tip, really depended on kind of sometimes the geography of the state, but also just how much urbanized area you have. Like I think it was New Jersey that the whole state was covered by MPOs.
Exactly.
And then some states only have one, some are majority of rural areas. And so it made sense for some states to treat their regional tips exactly the same way they treat their MPO tips and have everybody do it at the same time. And some states have gaps in regional planning organizations. And so they had to do it through the districts like TxDOT does. And so that geography and governmental makeup and even state laws sometimes really kind of set the stage for how you had to do things and adapt.
Yeah, that's a great point, and also kind of tease up that first key takeaway we wanted to underline, which is that diversity of approach. And so fundamentally, all these states are dealing with the same set of regulations, same set of rules, same set of challenges. But in talking to them and kind of taking back to the theme of storytelling, listening to their stories, what we heard was that they had all developed some very specific solutions that were very specific to the context in which they needed to operate. So a couple of other quick findings from the questionnaire that we did. We asked states about their biggest challenges. And of course, several of these, again, overlap across states, but you see some common themes: alignment with plans and programs, timeline, right? SIP platform limitations. That was a really common one. We heard from a lot of states who had developed their own tools and techniques, but some of them were a little long in the tooth now, and they'd love to start over. Or we'll also talk to some states who were very proud of systems that they built and felt like they couldn't function without them, and everywhere in between. So definitely some challenges in terms of managing STIP data, coordination with partners, who's involved, who's at the table, and then staffing. That was a common theme. Never enough folks on hand to kind of deal with the challenges of STIP programming. And we also asked for roles and kind of what was the role that kind of each major unit involved played with STIP development, from headquarters down to districts to MPOs and local partners. And broadly, as you can see from the word clouds here, the general delineation seemed to be that headquarters central office staff is really involved in kind of that process, the procedural stuff, the funding stuff, the broad kind of development and management stuff. The districts and MPOs, of course, are kind of the engine of project development and coordination with the public, and kind of understanding what the situation is on the ground. And then local partners as well bring in, and RPOs bring in a lot of that same context, local perspective, planning and coordination through rural agencies, for example.
And Ken, I'll add that, of course, a lot of the variation stemmed from DOT being very centralized versus maybe very decentralized, and having a lot more planners and STIP programmers in the actual districts versus all the headquarters. And so that, of course, created a lot of differences as well.
Exactly. So in the interviews, just to give you all a brief interview of the topics we covered, we tried to maintain these kind of conversational interviews and, like I said, get the story out of folks, right? And so we would always start with background, ask folks a version of the question like, tell us about you, your background, and the team that manages your STIP. And then we would get into things like process. From a 50,000-foot view, how do you manage things? Function. What are the roles that each person kind of plays and each team serves? Alignment. How well does your STIP align with other plans and programs? Management. What tools are you using to manage it and deal with things on a day-to-day basis? And then, of course, kind of communications tools, quality control, and state specifics. And those state specifics we got from the questions that we asked in the survey questionnaire. So the approach was kind of go into a conversation with the state, having some unique understanding of what makes each state unique, and then ask them about it. And we got some really interesting takeaways from those portions of the conversation. So a little overview of some of the things that we heard and some more of the variety across the country here. So SIP duration, 4 years is certainly the most popular timeframe. Texas has a 4-year SIP, as do 29 other states. And federal approval, by the way, specifies that that approval applies only to the first 4 years. Now, I, on the other hand, come from a state that was a 10-year SIP, like New Jersey and North Carolina. Rhode Island is one of the other 10-year SIPs. And there are a few states with everything in between except 9 years. For whatever reason, nobody wants to do a 9-year
five
SIP.
into 3. So yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So a little variation across the country there. We also encountered, as we were talking to states, a real variation in terms of how documentation is presented. And I want to, this is sort of a deliberate apples and oranges comparison, but I think it shows something interesting, which is why we chose these 2 examples. So we have on the left a diagram from North Carolina DOT kind of explaining their flow of funds. And so from that one page, you can get a pretty good sense of like where their money comes from, what color of money is involved in funding projects, and kind of how it winds up from the collection point to ultimately the delivery point, and how projects are financed. On the right-hand side, you have a table of information from Indiana DOT that lays out their total resources and their total uses. And I totally, as Christos mentioned, my background is in financial planning and programming. I'm totally a capital programming lover. But one thing I like about the Indiana example is in terms of resources, you can get that same information, that color of money, origin point, where's the money coming from. But then if you look at their programs and special projects, what you see is very clear delineation of certain major projects and initiatives that they have going on, but then also some programmatic offerings. And so you can really arrive at a similar conclusion, even though you're looking at 2 different pieces of information, 2 different states, really focusing on 2 different purposes. You can kind of look at the information in these 2 different ways and gather a lot of the same concluding points from it. So this was a really interesting thing to talk to as we went from state to state. Now, I should also mention the SIP-TIP relationship, and this is one of the more interesting findings we had. And so one of the things that all the states kind of had to struggle with was, how do you manage consistency between MPO's TIPs and the statewide SIPs? And we encountered a lot of different ways that states like Michigan, Maryland, Indiana, and Illinois especially approached this. And one of those was just simply putting no projects within MPO boundaries within the statewide programs. So kind of drawing a dividing line and saying, if a project is in a metropolitan area, we're going to leave it in that MPO's TIP. If it's not in a metropolitan area, or it's like an interstate system project or something like that, then we will put it in the STIP, and just kind of drawing that line so that there's no overlap. We also talked to some other states that only put like on system projects in their STIP, for example, had separate like state level documents for off system projects. And then MPO projects or TIP projects getting incorporated by reference. That was a popular one, and one that was kind of new information and a new example really to Texas, that there's a lot of states that say in their STIP, the latest version of all of the TIPs in our state are being incorporated into this document by reference, which allows a more summary level description of federally suballocated dollars. You can also do things like putting locally let federally funded projects only in the TIP, and then allowing the TIP to be the site where those things get updated, and not needing to necessarily update the STIP separately because the TIP is incorporated by reference. Or of course, the example like Mike used of developing the STIP first. So drafting the whole STIP saying, here's an amount of money that's going to be made available to each of the metropolitan areas to program their TIP, and then it gets incorporated by reference. And so that's kind of our second key takeaway we wanted to highlight here, is planning alignment. All states have the same fundamental challenge, which is our TIPs and our STIPs and our MTPs all have to line up with one another. How do we do that? Some states it's by reference. Other states like Texas, it's more of a copy and paste exercise where projects are listed in the TIP and then they're listed again verbatim in the STIP, so that the STIP has everything in it, inclusive of all of the other TIPs, which is a challenging process to manage, certainly. All right, and then just want to give a couple quick examples of some of the other things we found from states. Quick shout out to Michigan, who love their transportation portal. Michigan has an example of a STIP and then also a 5-year transportation plan. And so right from their STIP portal, you can get to both of those as well as the draft STIP that they're working on, which I really like. And there's some good material here about like how they accept feedback, what they're accepting feedback on, kind of what the role of the public is in supporting the STIP process. And from that example too, we talked a lot about data management with a lot of different states and heard that the things that are really priorities are like running efficient reports, managing financial information, presenting GIS information, revisions, errors, coordinating unified revisions. So between the TIPs and the STIPs, achieving that overlap, and then of course, securing approval and communicating with other systems. And I know this is another area where Mike and I varied coming into this. I was someone who worked on developing an eSTIP through software platform out of state. Mike, what remind me of the background in Missouri?
That was an in-house built called Sims. Yeah, they built it in-house and improved it over time to Missouri.
And that's what we heard from the folks in Missouri too. I think they're still using it, and they're still improving it, and it's still working for them.
Well, Ken, I was going to take a moment to pause here, kind of do more in a minute, but talking about the eSTIPs, I think through all of our conversations, I feel like the closest thing to a silver bullet for an efficient STIP was an integrated TIP-STIP platform, right?
Absolutely.
Where the MPOs and the districts were putting the projects in for the TIPs, and then it basically rolled up into the STIP itself. It saved a lot of time, gave extra time for review. And not only that, but I felt the most successful ones were eSTIP platforms that were built with the MPOs and the districts there at the beginning, right? And so they got their input to see what would work best for everybody. And then also some states, I think it was Michigan, that even rolled it out in waves. Maybe it was, I believe it was kind of a read-only first, and then they had everybody putting projects in the next round and updated the STIP. So I think that collaboration was key. So not only through like your normal meetings and those kind of things and communication, but building it into your tools itself was really effective.
Yeah, and I think we heard from a lot of the Midwest states, I think, have achieved a lot in that way. Michigan, I believe, was the one that did a 2-stage rollout where they did a whole eSTIP system for the state, and then they rolled out the eSTIP system for their MPOs. Ohio is another
Washington was also
really,
one of those two.
Yeah, very mature systems that kind of help them manage things. So on another theme with that data management is grouping. And so grouping is an area where Texas has a lot of grouping allowances, which makes sense because the state is so large. But this is another good example of the difference between there being language in a CFR and then what division offices will allow, and then ultimately how the states wind up administering a program. So we talked to some states that said they don't use grouping at all. And in those that do use grouping, kind of the most common categories of grouping were things like system preservation, small safety projects like bike ped projects, rec trails, things of that nature. Whereas there are states like Washington DOT, for example, where they deliver pavement projects as kind of individually listed district level budgets. So they'll say like, District 1 pavement budget for the year, here it is as one line item in the STIP. And then ultimately it's incumbent upon the district staff to kind of, work with the regional partners and locals and things like that to ultimately deliver that program. So this is another key takeaway. Like these are examples of kind of strategic approaches that states use to simplify management and ultimately improve efficiency of how they're managing their programs. Another quick shout out here. I just like to sprinkle in these examples from other states like New Jersey, their eSTIP platform, very similar to what you're looking at in Michigan, but just kind of a different layout. You can access a lot of the same information from one landing page. And then as we went through stakeholder involvement and engagement, we talked to a lot of different states that had a lot of different interesting methods. So online comment was big, certainly, but also things like educational videos, use of open houses and different meeting types for folks to really kind of get the public involved. Another thing we heard that was interesting was amendments. And one of the benefits of using incorporating TIPs by reference into STIPs is that it can really localize the public involvement process. So the MPOs each manage their own public comment period for the TIPs. They have public meetings and things in areas that make sense for folks who are interested in those projects. As soon as that public comment period, that process is concluded, the results of it wind up getting rolled up into the STIP by reference. That's the beauty of it all.
Well, Ken, I think it's important to note,
please,
there's a wide variation for all of you on the call between public comment periods, right? So I think
absolutely.
I think there was somewhere between 3 days was the least amount, maybe 30 was the most, or something like that. But there was quite a bit of variation there as well.
Yeah, and I came from a state where it was 30 days in a lot of cases, 10 days if we had a minor amendment. So yeah, there's nothing in statute. It's up for interpretation, but states have taken different paths, certainly. So lastly, just
Ken, I just wanted to
please, yeah,
right now we have about 5 minutes left for
sure,
Casey. We'll give him a little more, but just
sure.
wanted to give you the alert.
Ours
Yeah,
was definitely the more data intensive.
We're right
side.
there. Yeah, we're right there. So just to tee up Casey as well. So for review, amendment, and approval, we talked to a lot of states that had either monthly or quarterly review, amendment, and approval processes. Some states had as often as like biweekly, and some states as infrequently as biannual. We also talked to some states that do this real-time management of data, where something changes, they update it, and then they simply report it out at kind of a regular cadence. And one of the things I think you'll hear Casey talk about is that Texas certainly has longer timelines on things like amendment and approval processes. And ultimately, that a lot of the things we covered today are ultimately governed by and sort of organized through these MOAs and MOUs that kind of lay out all of these procedural steps, who does what, why, when, how, and kind of how it all interacts. And so just bring it back to that broad point of relationships matter. And that's one of the things that we really heard across talking to each one of these states. But so in the interest of time, I'm going to go right ahead and queue up Casey Wells to talk about the next piece of this, which is implementing enhanced pieces of the process in Texas. Casey? You're muted, sir. There we go.
I've got double. So the next slide. So thanks, Ken. As noted in my bio at the beginning, I've got the systems planning section within our planning and programming division here at TxDOT. That division is broken up into 8 sections. So one of those sections, systems planning, is the one that I get to support. The 3 teams that are in that section are the STIP, metropolitan planning, and statewide planning. So statewide planning is where our our long-range plan is developed. Our resilience plan is also where things like functional class, carbon reduction, and protect have been managed. And then the MPO team that I've got has 6 MPO coordinators, which are spread out across our 24 MPOs. And then, as noted, the STIP is in my section as well. We've got a STIP manager and 4 planners that work under that manager to help deliver the STIP. Next slide. Okay. All right. So as they noted, we've done a pretty robust peer review process from the desktop review to the interviews. And so there's been a lot of data that we've collected, and then the interviews obviously got us a chance to dive a lot deeper. Those were all 90 minutes, and so we can cover a lot of ground in those. And so we uncovered, as noted earlier, that every state pretty much does their STIP a little bit different. And we seem to be an outlier across various things, including, like, the topic that was just discussed, grouping. We do that very well, but we do have a pretty restrictive process across the rest of the way we do our STIP. And so this has been a good effort for us to inform some of the ways that we want to change our processes by potentially leveraging and implementing some of the best practices that we noted from other states. So that we're kind of right there on that transition period where we've collected the data, we're assessing what will work for us, and then we're going to be generating that implementation plan. And I'll cover that very briefly on the next 3 slides. The first one there, just some short-term actions that we're kicking around, improving internal and coordination. I think everyone understands what that is and knows that the need to always kind of be doing that as best as you can. We have our capital plan is a 10-year plan. It's actually adopted about 2 days before the fiscal year in which it takes effect. And so we always kind of have to juggle a couple of timelines there because we try to adopt our STIP a little bit earlier than that. So there always is this catch-up period. And so we're looking at how to kind of better manage our timelines so that our capital plan, our 10-year plan, and our STIP work well together. Providing guidance to the MPOs. It seems like you can never provide the MPOs enough guidance, and can never stop repeating some of the same guidance that you've already shared. And so we're working on a very similar parallel effort there to improve overall our MPO administration and coordination. And then as we kind of covered at length here, just identifying the various aspects of how we manage our STIP and looking to refine those in order to improve efficiencies and reduce burdens on ourselves and our partners. Medium term, so this is like 6 months and beyond. Everyone knows that the federal highway is going through a lot of change right now, and so we're trying to work with them on ways to streamline our STIP process. They do a pretty thorough review of our STIP, probably more thorough than any of the states that we interviewed. And so we actually, several of the states we found have an MOA with their federal team, and we don't really have that in place right now. You know, the one that Oklahoma has always comes to my mind because it's very simple, very straightforward, has some really good timelines. It just really kind of commits federal highways to certain review times. So we're looking at doing an MOA with those partners. Given the environment, I'm not super confident they'll sign that right now, so it may be more like a memo. But that's where we're going right now with our federal teams. And then, you know, as we've covered here, we've identified several enhancements that we want to do to our STIP process, simplifying some things like our project listings. We found that our project listings are way more detailed than other states, including the description of the project itself, as well as the funding breakdown. We put a lot of detail in our project pages in our TIP, and we think there's some areas to reduce that level of detail, just to improve some efficiencies and to reduce error, honestly, because when you have that much detail, you just introduce so much more room for error. And then longer term, we are looking at a new e-STIP. We developed our e-STIP in-house about 10 years ago, and as the bridge community would say, it's structurally deficient and functionally obsolete. So we really can't make improvements to it right now. We need to replace it, and so we're pursuing an external third-party procurement for a new e-STIP, and we've connected with a few states to learn about the e-STIPs that they've got from third parties. So we feel pretty well informed there and very excited. We think that the new e-STIP will actually allow us to implement some changes just based on the tool that we use that will, I personally think we'll see about a 30% increase in efficiency just from having the right tool for the job. One thing too that was clear on this effort and on the MPO effort that we're doing is that there's really not, that there doesn't seem to be a solid community of that group of folks that manage the STIP and manage their MPOs. And so we are considering looking into some opportunities for some additional peer review and potentially even looking at, well, I won't spoil the next slide. So let's go ahead and jump to that one. So we are planning to, well, we've proposed, you know, a workshop at AASHTO. So I know that AASHTO is still looking at their programming for the annual meeting, you know, SASHTO, WASHTO, et cetera. And then, but one thing that seemed clear to me was that a pooled fund or something similar would be very, very well received across the DOTs for folks like myself who you know, oversee the STIP and oversee the MPO coordination process for their DOT. So I've got a scope for that, and I just need to kind of dial that in a little bit further, and then you know, talk to my leadership about getting serious about going in on a pooled fund. And I guess that's all I really wanted to share, just to kind of close out, just from the state DOT experience. It's been a great experience, definitely learning a lot from the peers. And it's actually been very fascinating to see how different every state does it. So Ken, I'll let you close it out.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll throw back to Yana, because I think we just got about done right before the top of the hour. But I just want to say too, we'd all love to hear from you. And I mentioned we talked to about 20 of the states. I'm sure there's other states represented on this call that we didn't talk to. And of course, we'd love to hear more perspectives, more stories, and kind of more profiles and how you manage your STIP and what your challenges are, and kind of learn from across the country. So thank you all for the opportunity, and Yana, I'll throw it back to you.
And I was gonna say a shout out, Ken, to all the states that were involved in interviews.
Absolutely.
The conversation was so great. Everybody was so open with sharing information and so helpful.
Indeed.
All right. Thank you, Ken, Mike, and Casey. We really appreciate when people who have the kind of experience you guys have had share it with all of the country, and it's being videotaped, so I mean videoed, and so you'll be sharing it into the coming year as people look into how they improve their STIP processes. So now we're shifting to a panelist discussion portion of the webinar. And so what we've prepared some questions, so we're going to start with those, but I see there's already a question from Matt Hobrick in the chat, but others should add their questions into the chat. And after we go through some of the prepared questions, we'll shift to the questions from the audience. All right. So let's start with Garret. So, you know, it's fascinating to see the presentation you made about the shift that's happening in our industry on enhancing communication and collaboration. And so, you know, if you could share more about why is it, you know, so becoming more important today and significant, and especially in the safety performance area. But if you could also speak more broadly about it for all of transportation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, within our DOTs, we know that safety is that center, the fulcrum of which we make every decision. But we're living in a real world where this is a real urgent safety crisis. And, you know, in my state alone, over 300 people losing their lives annually, not to mention the, you know, serious injuries, the ripple effect across communities and families. Either grieving that loss or living with the loss of income, a loss of employment. You know, it's a true devastating impact. And then we also look at what's the impact on our state as a whole. Higher increase in roadway fatalities, safety issues results in increased cost to each individual, whether you're a safe driver or not. Your insurance rates are going to go up, right? And that takes money out of your pocket. Most people don't make that association with what's happening from person A, who is an unsafe driver, driving 130 miles per hour, getting in crashes, versus me, I don't speed, I haven't been in a crash, right? I mean, they don't associate person A with why their insurance rates are going up. They just see it go up and they know it has a negative impact on them. So by centering safety, we can protect all users, we can protect our communities, we can protect our workers, but we have to go beyond the numbers. And because of the changing transportation world, the changing media environment, the changing ways we're seeing transportation play out with you know, more advanced technology inside of our vehicles, which are no longer just vehicles, they are computers on wheels, essentially, right? It's going to require us as DOTs to collaborate across multiple state agencies, collaborate across multiple other partners we traditionally have not partnered with. And just coming with the data isn't enough to drive change anymore. We have to pair it with that storytelling. Otherwise, we're not going to see behavior change. And so we can use that data to craft that message, but to really reach in and you know, impact individuals really inside their phone, because that's where they're going to be getting their media and their information. We need to have that you know, captivating story to tell in order to capture their attention.
Well, for you and the panel, do you think that you know, the shift of our society using social media more is shifting us as an industry to be able to tell stories in more bite-sized chunks? Who wants to take that one?
Well, I'll just say I can let them answer if they think we are doing it. I think we have to do it. I don't think we're doing a great job. I think some state DOTs are doing a great job. You know, others, including mine, we have a long way to go. We're not on TikTok, right? You know, it's a state government rule. We're not allowed to use it, so we're missing a whole population. We also aren't recording in that medium and attuning it to that medium. But I'll let others respond how they think it's going.
I'd love to chime in and say I think you're absolutely right, Yana, about kind of the role that plays. And I think there are a number of DOTs, including the ones we interviewed for our study, who are trying to engage in that way and who are producing videos and things like that for both members of their state, just members of the public in general, to kind of understand their role in the process. I would say one area, though, where I feel like we have a long way to go is in states communicating to each other. And one of the things we didn't mention in our presentation was we did a share out April 11th to all the states we interviewed. And there was like 3 conversations going on. There was the conversation we were having and presenting. There was a separate conversation of states like answering questions and stuff in the chat. And then there was this third conversation of states talking to each other and sharing resources and saying, oh, that's amazing. I didn't know we could do that. Can you send us your example, and kind of trading notes? And I think that's where we still maybe need some time and focus to get together, get down into the weeds. And, you know, we like to use the phrase, get in a room together and work on a whiteboard.
Yeah. Mike or Casey, do you have anything, or I can move on to the next question.
Well, I think the challenge sometimes with the STIP is it's almost your whole story, right? Your whole story for DOT for your next 4 or 5 years, and communicate that importance to people. And I'll kind of tack on what Garrett said. This is always my plug in programming, where maybe it's not as glamorous as some other areas of DOT on paper, but I always think of it as, if you can create a very efficient STIP and programming process, you're going to be delivering those key safety projects that Garrett's talking about a quarter, 6 months earlier, getting those on the road. Because if you were lacking communication, right, with your STIP, with your project managers in your planning department, and you delay the project, you might miss a letting couple cycles. If like Hawaii, if you have 2 amendments a year, you might be missing 6 months. So having very efficient and great communication with your programming leads to getting those safety improvements and those bridge replacements and all that on the road.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just another thought I had as I watched your presentations and, you know, mulled over this topic is, I've seen more and more in kind of other things outside of transportation using the TEDx format, where specifically you actually set up sessions, you know, like an AASHTO annual meeting would be set up with speakers with a video component, but each speaker is coached by a TEDx style coach, where there's a very prescriptive way of telling a good story. It's not one way, but the coach is experienced at the delivery part, not the content part. You know, that there's a lot of emphasis on the delivery. And so a lot of the coaches are actors, you know, who have that experience of projecting. And it makes me think that we're probably going to move into that direction. And then you also have a much better repository of the content that is available to everybody, you know, once it's been delivered. I feel like we're fairly inconsistent as an industry on sharing that content. You know, we always record these webinars, but, you know, sometimes you go to a big meeting and sometimes the presentations are available, but most times they're not. So, all right, so let's move on to the next question. So, so for all of you to share, you know, what can our audience of transportation professionals do immediately to incorporate storytelling in the work we all do? What are some of your thoughts on that?
I'll chime in and with the easy answer, which is, I think, talk to each other. And I was blown away, like I said, at how much chatter states had with one another, the amount of experience that was getting shared, the resources that were getting shared. And I have to say, I worked at a state DOT for many years, and I certainly didn't think to call my peers as often as I probably should have and say, hey, you're me in a different state. I'm having this issue with communicating this challenge either to my boss or to the public or to whatever it is. Have you done it? Have you approached it? What's worked? And I think there would be having more opportunities to do that, encouraging states to do that more often, I think would lead to a lot of synergies and a lot of good ways that would bring efficiency.
Yeah, I understand theme, Ken. I think it's sharing their stories, sharing their war stories, right? And I think too, and I think when Casey on the spot, I know Casey does a great job even of that, of reaching out as we were leading into this, reaching out to other states and partners that he's worked with in his role in other states. And I think that is key. And I think I did the same thing in Missouri, Ken. We was fortunate to be in a bi-state MPO area. So we sat at the same table with Kansas and a lot of things. And so we had a little more of that naturally maybe than you did. But yeah, sharing those stories is key, because then you start to go, oh, you do this, well, I do this. And what about this? Yeah.
Yeah, we lean pretty heavy on what other states are doing. I used to be in a different kind of, planning discipline. I kind of sort of became a professional planning person through the freight channels, and I was in a pooled fund with the Southeast states and the Mid-America states. So I got to know a lot of other state DOTs and really see the value in connecting with your peers and how they're dealing with things in their state. And then it just kind of, that was with freight, which was kind of like a planning topic, but it set me up well to, as I transitioned over to the STIP and MPO space, where it's a lot more policy and programmatic, stepping up a level in, the need to coordinate and understand how other states are doing things. As Ken mentioned earlier, everything that we found on our STIP and MPO work, it really comes down to, the arrangement between the DOT and their federal teams, and how they interpret the CFR and what they're kind of willing to let you do or whatnot. And so it's been helpful for me to bounce ideas off of other state DOTs, because then I can kind of circle that back to the federal team and say, your peers over in whatever state are allowing their DOT to do this. We would like to explore that possibility here. So I also wanted to touch base on another aspect of your question, which was like storytelling, and kind of just switch gears a little bit. I picked this up again from when I was in freight, actually, trying to get people to understand supply chains. And so like you'll see these little like one pager, like roadmap, like how does a pecan get from the tree to the store, and like where does it go, or car parts, they come back and forth across, the Mexican border and stuff. So we're going to take a similar approach on that, with trying to tell the story of like, a conformity determination for a TIP or an MTP review in a non-attainment area. So kind of putting that in like a roadmap style story map to try to help tell the story to our partners and our stakeholders, which, from a TIP perspective, you might be dealing with someone who knows what a car and a truck is. And then they also help make decisions on $1 billion project portfolio. So these are like local electeds, that really don't know the nitty gritty of the policies and procedures. But if you can put that in like that high level story map flow, they might understand the more complicated topics a little bit better, such as conformity, which, really no one understands very well. And so trying to find, a different approach, just like, I think I heard someone say earlier, did you say that, Garrett, technocrats, like technical bureaucrats? I had never heard that before, but, conformity is a technocratic process that, the common folk don't understand. And it's the common folks that I mentioned a second ago that are making those decisions on these $1 billion portfolios that just don't understand the ins and outs of something like conformity that can really throw your TIP out of whack. And so that's one of the approaches that I wanted to share that we're looking at for telling the story on that process.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Casey. Well, yes.
I'll just add really one more quick thing is we might have to collect new types of data in terms of like stories. So during the project planning process, you might have to, during your informational meetings or open houses, collect some quotes, collect some stories, so you can use those to paint the picture in the future as to what does this replacing this bridge actually mean for family A who lives on one side of the bridge. Like, so collecting some of those stories and anecdotes and quotes is, I think, a new data point that we should be collecting and using.
I think both of those comments are a great lead into another question for you all, which is, how do you balance the more technical side, the metrics, the data, with the storytelling? I think we've all been there where someone is telling, sharing all the facts and data, and you're not really communicating a point, but you also know when storytelling doesn't have specific content, it's not as believable. So any advice that you guys want to share?
I can share some perspective on that, and I think Garrett may be able to connect with this. I know our executive director at TxDOT, well, you know, we have 25 districts, 24 MPOs. We have a national border. We have like 28, you know, commercial ports of entry. We have several ports. We're a Gulf state, so we've got maritime. We've got oil and gas. So, you know, you can imagine kind of just like how political and how pressure packed things can get on a DOT, and then specifically on that executive director. And so if an executive director is asked like, how you know, how are you doing, like by an elected or, you know, by the governor's office, he or she has to think about all the aspects that we deal with DOT, and then all of those different pressure points that are coming from all those angles. That's just too much for any one person to be able to say. And so I think our executive director really hones in on performance measures, because that's like, if you can boil it down to like, what's the data that shows how are we doing on safety, preservation, project delivery is a huge one for us. And so for me, the topic of my discussion today was the STIP. And so a couple of years ago, our project delivery director, like the chief level person, said, you know, we gave him an overview of what the STIP is, and he kind of listened to all that, and then he kind of paused and said, so how do you make success of the STIP? And we don't really have any like STIPs focused success measures. And so we want to kind of hone in on what those are so that we can communicate to those folks that are a little bit more technical minded and can understand the data, like how well are you performing? For us, you know, it's like, how long is a project in the STIP? Was it in there for 8 years? Was the original total project cost the same as what it is when it let? And there's various little STIP performance, you know, success measures that we want to identify to try to help, communicate through data and through performance metrics, you know, kind of the technical aspect of how well we're doing.
So one of my colleagues in my communications team here, you know, explained it as data provides the what, but storytelling provides the so what or why it matters. I mean, right? It's the and I think a lot of us get stuck in the what realm. I know I do. When I get up there, you know, talking to people, I really focus on the what, and it's a conscious effort to like pivot to the why that matters, why that data matters. So, you know, talking about a specific safety countermeasure at a specific location and how much it reduced, you know, the crashes or the intersection violations, use that data point, but then pivot to what does that mean for that community, is you know, something that we've been consciously trying to change here in our agency.
Yeah, I was going to say real quick, Garrett, you stole kind of half my sentence. I was going to say, well, why is it important to you? The two things we're helping TxDOT with on the STIP side is obviously writing the narrative to the STIP, which is public facing, and they're also helping them write a handbook to the users, to the MPOs and the districts. And we can quote CFRs all day long and put tables and that sort of thing, and that's important. But again, it's back to why is it important to my audience, you know? And so how are you communicating that across? Why should they care about what I'm telling them?
Yeah, and if I can just put a cherry on that, Yana, I think from all these things, and I'd especially reach for safety and some of the stuff Garrett talked about, pay attention to the areas where the stories and the data don't necessarily give you the same conclusion, but do it in an additive way. And I think a good example of this is I've been working on a safety action plan in New Britain, just very close to where ConnDOT's located. And we had two different answers from where are your high crash corridors if you just look at all your crash data versus where do people say they feel unsafe. And both of those things matter because one of those areas where people say they might feel unsafe could just as easily become one of your high crash corridors in a couple of years if a few of those near misses become, you know, tragedies. So putting those two things together, collecting a lot of that information at the same time, and then saying, this is giving me a different answer than this, and asking the question of why can kind of get you to a more complete set of solutions.
So that qualitative meaning the quantitative. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. So a question from Matt Hobrick, who lives in Iowa, was formerly with the Iowa DOT. I think his question was entered, Garrett, when you shared the national numbers for fatalities in 2023. So he's saying that that his state shares weekly fatality counts, and that those numbers don't seem as impactful as the national number of 40,000. Have state agencies considered sharing weekly national fatality counts rather than the counts of individual states?
That's a good question. I don't know. We can ask the AASHTO safety team. The good thing about that is it's something so easily able to be tested. It's not like an infrastructure treatment that we're going to install and build. It's just a message on a sign, and we can try it out for a little while and see if that captures any more attention. I think with every messaging campaign, they eventually lose their effectiveness. For us, it was brand new when we started doing it, so it captured a lot of attention. But I imagine over time, if a state has had it for a while, it's eventually going to lose that attention grabbing ability. So maybe using the national numbers would help. My only warning would be sometimes when you zoom out too far, then people don't pay attention to what's happening at the national level. They only care about what's happening closer to home, impacting their community.
All right. A final question for you all. Just a quick answer from each of you. So what resource or tool would you recommend to agencies that are working to improve their storytelling capabilities? Who wants to start?
I'll go first.
Okay, thank you.
I think a lot of need for some interdisciplinary collaboration across your agencies. So having some of your data analysts partner with communications professionals to craft those narratives. It's being a communications professional is not something that can be easily translated. We joke a lot in my agency that we need people to take what the engineers are talking about every single day and translate it for the rest of us. I'm not an engineer, so I'm constantly having to try and act like that translator to the public or to the to the legislature or to the governor, what my engineering team here at Conduit is explaining. So having those people that can be that translator is important when you're building those cross-functional teams. And I think investing in some data visualization tools is important. They're becoming better and better every single day. And just make sure that they're understandable to someone who's not technical or is not like the most tech savvy. Like you keep it simple and make it accessible for people who may have color deficiencies or color blindness too, right? You want to make sure that it's accessible to everyone and easily understood.
Who wants to go next? Quick tip.
I'll throw an obscure one out there, which is just about any repository of like a national sample of plans or submissions of like anything that's required. I've always liked, something I know you and I have both used a lot, which is like the AASHTO asset management site and kind of repository of all of the asset management plans across all 50 states. I think for anyone starting a process of any kind, even if it's related to asset management or not, it's good to just get your mind around how 50 different sets of people have addressed the same type of questions and presented information in different ways and thought about things in different ways and maybe borrowed things from some of their peers already, so you can see what's been popular among 3 or 4 or 5 folks. I think it's just a great way to get a sense of kind of what's out there and figure out how to tell your story.
And on that vein, the AASHTO TPM portal has this functionality called collections, and there is one on long range plans that was added. Would you and Texas DOT be willing to share all of the STIPs you've collected and we could put them up as a collection.
We certainly could, and that was something we heard a lot of interest from a lot of the states of, hey, where's
Yeah.
my STIP repository of things I
Yeah.
can go and look at?
Yeah. All right. We'll be back in touch.
Sounds good.
All right.
Well, I have a quick one. Utilizing ArcGIS story maps. I've seen it used for corridor studies, and we're helping TxDOT recently with kind of a functional class reclassification, and Arizona DOT has a great one out there. So if for very data intensive topics that you may not expect one that would make sense, they could be utilized, and really nice quick visual way to display that for the public, and for anybody who wants a quick snapshot of what a really technical process, use the ArcGIS story map.
Great. Casey, you want to share a tip, or we can move on to?
I know, I mean, I would just kind of repeat what Ken and Mike have already said.
Okay. Yes. Well, thank you all. I'm going to now turn it over to Jean Wallace, who's going to wrap up the webinar for us. Jean.
Yeah, thank you, Deanna. Thank you very much, President Eucalitto and Ken and Casey and Mike. Great presentation today, great webinar. So many good tips, and I think something that I've learned too is context is everything when we're talking about transportation in a way that people can resonate, or that resonates with our users and our stakeholders. So this was fantastic. I know I'm going to be sharing this link to this webinar with my team. So I just want to say that the next webinar is scheduled for July 16th at 2:00 p.m. Eastern Time. And that topic will be evaluating post-project outcomes. More information will be provided as we get closer to the date of the webinar, and I really hope you are all able to join us. Additional webinars will be continuing too. We schedule those every 2 months. And if you have any ideas for webinars you'd like to see, please feel free to reach out. Just as a final reminder, for more information, you can visit tpm-portal.com for recordings and other information about our activities and these webinars. Thank you very much again for everyone for participating today. Thanks again to our presenters. It was a fantastic discussion. Stay safe, everyone.